Those familiar with the works of Julius Evola may be very well acquainted with his view on fascism, more specifically Italian fascism, as he himself would be familiar with it head on living in Italy. Evola had both positive and negative things to say regarding the Italian variant of fascism, namely that it was good in that it opposed a spirit of modernity and embodied many aspects of a traditional way of political organization, but bad in that it lacked a truly spiritual aspect in the primordial sense of the word spiritual. Evola's main issue would have been the lack of religiosity united to the fascist state. However, many are not familiar with what he had to say about the Spanish variant of fascism, what one would call Falangism. In this video, we're going to take a look at an article titled What is Spanish Falangism, published in 1937, translated into English by the website Countercurrents. So let us begin here. With the phases of the Spanish Civil War are followed by all with keen interest. Less attention is paid to the exact ideas that inspired the revolt of the Spanish national forces against communism, perhaps because many believe that the positive ideological phase in revolutions always develops at a later date. We are not of this opinion. We believe that the best soldier is one who fights with a precise knowledge of his cause, and that ideas, even if they are only limited or vaguely grasped, more than clearly formulated, are the essential reality in every genuinely important historical upheaval. We are therefore grateful to Alberto Lucchini for informing us of the doctrinal program of the one primary Spanish nationalist movements, the so-called Spanish Falange, rendering its terms lively with resources in the truly astonishing style of translation, and we would say almost necromantic through vigor, precision, and pleasing improvisation. It deals with a general profession of political faith, whose formulation appears to be due to Jose Antonio Primo de Rivera, or the writer Jimenez Caballero. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. The program, through this richness of spiritual content, has almost surprised us, insofar as we believe it opportune to report it to the Italian public by expressing in brief its meaning. First point. Neither linguistic nor ethnic or territorial unity is considered sufficient to give the idea of a nation its true content. Quote, a nation is a predestined cosmic unity, unquote. Such a claim is also the case in Spain, a unity, a destiny, an entity subsisting beyond every person, class, or community in which it is actualized. Not only, but moreover, the total quantity resulting from their aggregation. That is, it is about the spiritual and transcendent idea of the nation as opposed to every community, of the right or left, and every mechanism, a true entity of its perfect truth, a living and sovereign reality. Spain tends consequently towards its own definite destination. In this regard, they not only speak of, quote, a return in full to worldwide spiritual cooperation, unquote, but also of a universal mission of Spain, of a creation by the solar unity that it represents, of a new world, of course. This latter proposition, good intentions aside, remains a question mark. What can Spain today and even tomorrow say in regard to the universal idea is in fact unclear, but the reality is that here we have the effect of a precise logic. One cannot in fact assert spiritually that the idea of a nation without being instinctively brought to surpass its particularism, to conceive of it as a principle of supranational spiritual organization, with a value therefore of universality, even when it has little disposition to give concrete and effective form to such a need, and vice versa. Every particularistic restriction of a national idea is going always to accuse it of latent materialism and collectivism. Moving on to a more specifically political part of the program, the Phalanges say no to the agnostic state, a passive spectator of national public life, or at most, a police officer in a grand style, otherwise known as the night watchman state. The state of all total and totalitarian, justifying itself, however, in this form, always with a reference to the ideal of and perpetual notion of Spain, independent of any interest whatsoever, merely of class or party. So I think this right here is also part of a reason why Evola would be more sympathetic to Falangism than Italian fascism, because it rejects a notion of an agnostic or secular state. The eradication of parties and the associated parliament follows naturally from this view. But the Phalangists, under the force of the secular traditions of their homeland, also seem to be on guard against those excesses of totalitarianism, which in their work of leveling and uniformizing threaten to make some nationalist tendencies despite everything similar to the nationalizations by Bolshevism. It is so that the Phalangists insist on the necessity that organic human groups, alive and vital, articulate the true state and are its solid foundation. So they intend to defend the integrity of the family, the cell of the social unity, local autonomy, and the cell of territorial and finally corporate and professional unity, the cells of a new national organization of work and organs to overcome the class struggle. In the latter respect, adherence of the Phalangists to the fascist corporate idea is complete. The union and corporate groups so far unable to participate in national public life will have to rise, knocking down the artificial barriers of parliament and political parties, with the direct organs of the state. The community of producers, as an organic whole, will be conceived of as totally co-interested and involved in the only and highest common enterprise, an enterprise in which the leadership must always be secured to the general national interest. It is perhaps no coincidence that the chapter that immediately follows this is about the human personality, and that it denounces the danger that a whole nation will turn into a kind of quote unquote test laboratory, as in the logical consequences of Bolshevism and of mechanism. By mechanism, he's referring to, I believe, the almost materialist view of someone like Descartes, that kind of paradigm. The prominence given to the dignity of the human personality by distinguishing it clearly from the individualistic will seems to us indeed as one of the most salient and characteristic of the Spanish Falange's program, and the effect of a healthy traditional vision. We quote the passage that, in this respect, is the most significant. Quote, the Spanish Falange discerns in the human personality beyond the physical individual and physiological individuality the spiritual monad, the sole order to eternal life, the instrument of absolute values, and absolute value in himself. Hence, the justification of a fundamental respect for the quote unquote dignity of the human spirit, for the wholeness of freedom of the person, freedom legitimized from above, of a profound nature that no one can ever transpose into the freedom to conspire against civil society and to undermine its foundations. With this statement, one of the greatest dangers of the anti Marxist counter revolution is decisively overcome, the danger that is of infringing the spiritual values of the personality in the moment of rightfully striking the liberalistic and individualistic era in political and social life. With this premise, every materialistic interpretation of history is rejected by the Phalangists. Its spirit is conceived by them as a source of the truly decisive force. It is worth pointing out, and a profession of the Catholic faith is likewise natural. The Catholic interpretation of life is, historically speaking, the only one that is quote unquote Spanish, and every work of national reconstruction must pertain to it. This will not mean a Spain which would once more have to submit to the interference, intrigues, and hegemony of ecclesiastical power, but a new Spain animated by the quote unquote universal Catholic sense that already guides her. Against the alliance of an ocean of barbarism to the conquest of unknown continents, a Spain permeated by the religious forces of the Spirit. So the Phalangists fight for these ideas as a volunteer warrior meant to conquer Spain for Spain. These are ideas that, in their general outlines, seem to us perfectly in order. They already present a precise aspect and may have the value of solid points of reference. If the Spanish national movement will really be penetrated by them, we have a double reason to sincerely wish them a complete, rapid, and decisive victory, not only for the negative anti-communist and anti-Bolshevik facet, but also for what in its positive aspects will be able to follow from it in the whole of a new hierarchical Europe, of a nation, and of a personality. So that concludes the article here. As I was saying before, I do think that Evola would be a lot more sympathetic to this variant of the third position due to the fact that it has a more religious character. And yes, I'm aware that Evola was critical of Christianity, but I still think nonetheless he would prefer a Christian um, ethos as opposed to a more secular ethos, which you see in Italian fascism. And yes, I know that there were religious Italian fascists, but when we're speaking of the core of the ideology, I don't think Catholicism at all really played as much as a role in Italian fascism as it did in Spanish Falangism. So I'll leave a link to the article in the bio below, and yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching.